Så næste gang kommer til dem, der har lyst, kører buen, og så kører vi derfra. Yes, let's go. Thanks ind på targets, detector. Det skal være fint. Plus. Så bliver det firkant, så trekant. Firkant. Bare line op til pullen, mana burner dernede. Den, ikke den der går virker, men den der til os. Ja. Yes, bare pull.
Jeg tror jeg.
Lidt mana burning på den her. Ja, det kommer ikke nærmere. Der er vi de 4 builds. Giver de 2 sekunder til mana her. Lidt HB. Yes, vi kører tanks. Så vi går ikke kryds først. Den er Thorns. Detect up mages.
Members of Congress have been loading up on UNH over the past few weeks. This includes Majori Green, who's known for timing market bottoms. She's made 2x gains year to date in both AMD as well as Palantir. But the big question we need to ask when considering this company is the industry as a whole truly uninvestable right now? If we look at UNH, in fact, in regards to the wider market, the S&P isn't correlating to the stocks. Many companies are up and very significantly, and yet United Health, whilst it has recovered slightly, is down very significantly, more than 30% this year. So the question that we want to ask is a 2x reasonable for the stock in the short to medium term, and why October 13 could be the turning point that pushes it towards all-time highs. So let's break it down. We'll also get into our valuation today, but one thing we should consider, there aren't many companies that have had as much negative news as United Health. We're talking here, word is that they secretly were paying nursing homes to reduce hospital transfers, even told medical staff to change some patient status to do not resuscitate, and we know time and time again in 2025 the Department of Justice is investigating this company. That is what we have been hearing from the Wall Street Journal, and it does cover a few different elements. Now if we take a look at the company's earnings, it hasn't been the greatest, with one of the largest reasons being higher than expected medical costs, and what they've had to do in turn is cut their outlook. Not only that, but in 2025 they also did in fact suspend it. So quite a lot of information that we need to incorporate when we do consider this company, but very interesting to note that in the latest quarter, this was one of the positions that Warren Buffett did make new in Berkshire Hathaway. Something, yes, worth considering. He wasn't the only one. In fact, we have billionaire David Tepper, amongst others, adding quite a significant portion, makes up around 12% of his portfolio. We have contrarian investor Michael Burry, a new position, around 11%. And whilst Warren Buffett's name is always the first one on the headlines, it is of a smaller degree. Will be interesting when we get Q3 results to see whether he continues to load up. It is also very important to note here that we don't know what his average cost is, so he could still be in the red. Will be important to note this new quarter that does come up, if he is continuing to add, showing a real signal that he believes this one can rebound, and very strongly. Now we also have word just in the last few days, some positive news in fact, that the new CEO is talking to those close with Donald Trump, and they're really trying to rectify some of these issues that have come out, and they believe talking with the administration is one step in the right direction. And we also noticed last week they actually reaffirmed their outlook for 2025. They're projecting at least $16 per share. Now that is quite low. What will be interesting to note is in the next quarter that we're going to discuss, if they can show signs that they're going to be able to blow right through that then this really could see the company easily in the $400, maybe $500, and revenue will be another one that analysts will be keeping an eye on. And because of all this news that has come out, we've seen the continuation of price targets moving in the right direction. We have increases, Troy Securities up to 365, UBS 378, as well as Bernstein 379, and these are just a few of many that really believe United Health could be on the up. If we look at the company overall, they're down 40% in the last year. Year to date, down around 31, and over the last 10 years, we're going to compare that to both QQQ as well as the S&P. As of now, though, a very strong rebound from 52-week lows at $235, but still quite some way from 52-week highs. Now, both Seeking Alpha and Wall Street do consider this company a buy. 4.29, 4.03, not too bad, we would say fairly respectable. And whilst we are looking at this on a forward P, and it does look a little bit daunting, we're talking 29, that is above the 5-year average of 19.9, so yes, off the bat we would say potentially overvalued. Remember, they have cut their outlook, and this is potentially going to be a one-off, so if they do increase it in the following years, we could see this drop dramatically below the 20 mark. Yield is also above 2.5% versus 1.4. This, in fact, is what we typically would call an undervaluation signal, and it's worth highlighting, given the disparity between the yield and the 5-year average, that the dividend does look to be safe, a score of 80, as well as an increase in June of 5.2%. Remember, on the channel, we want to see a bare minimum of 4 just to keep up in line with inflation. The other valuation perspective that we like to look at is the blue tunnel, which correlates to the intrinsic or fair price. First things first, it has been decreasing from May this year. Not a good sign. We always want to see this going up, increasing the trajectory time after time, but we also see it now in the upper end of the blue tunnel, another reasonable, potentially moving into an overvaluation signal. But as always, remember, not in isolation, and we will be running this through our own valuation process. The other thing is, when we zoom out to the last 5 years, this one more often than not trades at a premium, although we do notice a stretch in the reasonable signal, and in 2025, investors have had the chance to buy this severely undervalued. As always, make sure notification bell is on, you are subscribed, and when we see high quality companies trading severely undervalued, we will let you know. Now, moving into their earnings, out of the last 4 quarters, they've actually only beaten off 2 of them, and the most recent one was a 37-cent miss. The next 2 quarters, they're projecting double-digit decrease to the earnings per share, with really Q2 2026 being where they see it turn positive. Now, earnings per share projected $18. This is actually 2026. If they hit that, forward P will come down to 19.5. Although you could argue new CO is in place, potentially some sandbagging, and if they do hit right through this, we are talking about this forward P coming much lower. And the next earnings is going to be on the 13th of October, so we're talking around 4 weeks away, of which, as we highlighted, for the full year EPS estimate sitting at $16.24. If we have a quick look at the projections moving on to the next few years, one thing we notice, if they do hit that 2025 estimate, that is a 41% drop from 2024. $18, as we said, into 2026, an 11% increase. But the real key takeaway here is they are anticipating moving forward into the next 10 years for earnings per share to increase at a double-digit rate. Always a great sign, especially for a company that some people would argue is severely undervalued right across every single metric. And it's also one that more often than not does show beat after beat in terms of the earnings. The last few bit of a struggle. But if we solely look at the earnings per share, last 2 years, so we're talking 8 quarters, they've beaten 8 out of 8. In terms of revenue, we notice 6 beats, 2 misses. Not a bad track record at all. And we can see here, in terms of the surprises, looking fairly decent. What this really tells us, going all the way back to 2009, they actually are a very consistent company. Yes, we're not seeing massive surprises, not a massive beat, but overall it tells us they are incredibly consistent. If we do the exact same to the revenue, well, we notice most recent annual accounts, they did in fact miss. If you want to see
Men, der
another
ligger
one,
på næste
you
år.
have to go back
Lige
to
det, man er igen, lidt
2019. And in terms of the disparity between the estimations and what they reported, again, not too dissimilar. So honestly, in reality, we would say, yes, never look at historical performances. It doesn't tell us anything about the future, but going back to 2009, this is a very consistent company. Now, it's also one of the institutions themselves like 88% ownership, selling 45 billion in just the last 12 months. They bought around 50% more at 65 billion, and they bought around 40% more in the most recent quarter, 14 billion buying, 11 billion selling. If we want to see the reverse of the trend, where they've sold more than they bought, you'd have to go to Q1 2024. And this really highlights, when we take a look at each quarter, more often than not, very often in fact, institutions are net buyers of United Health, and like super investors, like members of Congress, this is one they have been buying in 2025, both quarter 1 and quarter 2. But we also have to bear in mind growth not looking good, at least in the shorter term. They get an F overall, 10% last year, expected around 8% this year. Now on both accounts, not too dissimilar from the sector overall, a little bit lower than their historical. So what we are noticing, on average, this company grows their top line 10% year on year. But the thing that really lets them down is earnings per share, estimated in the next 3 to 5 years to not grow at all. When you just compare that to the sector, much higher at 10, and likewise their own 5-year, much higher at 13. So it's good to see they get an A+ on profitability. Gross margin lacking at 21%, sector well above at 60, their own 5-year above, so not something we really want to see. Bottom line though, 5%, much better. Even with the lower gross margin, they're managing a better net income in the sector, which is pretty much flat, and not too dissimilar from their own 5-year average. So bear in mind, this industry as a whole, their bottom line margins aren't the greatest. They are working on some very small numbers, and the cash this company generates from operations has actually been increasing. 29 billion on a trailing 12 months, above their average of 25, and a bit disappointing to see that the sector overall actually burns through cash negative 11 million. So you really need to be careful about which companies you are buying in this sector overall. Now we can also look under the hood at some of their metrics. First one, free cash flow count, as they do dividend. As always, we tend to look at it over the earnings, which is susceptible to manipulation by management through accounting. You look below 60%, that is what we get every single year. Projected to increase, but still below our threshold at 47%. And then we look at the free cash flow per share. As always, consistent growth year on year. We get it for the most part, although it is expected to drop over the next 12 months from $23 to $19. And sales growth, not too bad for a company in this industry, nearly double digit every single year. Trailing 12 month, highlighting that as well, sitting at 10%. Now we'll come back to the total sales in a bit, but in terms of shares outstanding, we love companies that return excess cash to investor pockets. Nothing too much to really write home about. We see a small drop on a trailing 12 month. One thing we would say though is it will be interesting to see if management in this next quarter really do a share buyback authorization program, just because it does look like the share price is a little bit undervalued. Now ROIC, minimum 10% or more, one of our favorite metrics. Give us faith, management are able to effectively allocate their capital. We see it. Not only that, but very consistent. Always a great sign to know. And then we move on to margins, which if you just you would say not great. But remember, it is actually higher than the sector overall, and this is what is to be expected, sitting around 7 to 9% in the last 10 years, and free cash flow margin pretty much straddling around that minimum 5%. Finally, net debt to EBITDA, very important, correlates to both dividend safety, balance sheet strength. Below 3 is what we want. Numbers you see, the number of years it would take United Health to pay off their debt, net of cash on hand. 1.73 expected in the next year, just something to keep an eye on, given that it is expected to increase, and we will touch upon the balance sheet as well. But as always, because it does correlate to balance sheet strength, definitely a metric to always look at. Now, how does the company compare against the S&P and QQQ? Well, over the last year, very obvious to note, massive underperformance, negative 40 on both accounts. The other two ETFs are in fact up double digit. That's also reflected when we look at the last 5 years, although they are up 23%. S&P up nearly 100, QQQ 118. But over the last 10 years, very, very interesting. After the slight run United Health has had, it is now pretty much in line with the S&P in the last 10 years, although we do know QQQ has massively outperformed. So one question I would like to add is, why would someone consider investing in UNH when QQQ has massively outperformed in the past, especially if you believe AI is going to continue to drive tech stocks moving forward? And then the other quick thing to do is look at how it compares against others in the sector. Is this an isolated issue or one that we are noticing across the board? And pretty much every single comparison here is down, and in fact significantly. Not great if you were heavily concentrated in this 12 months ago. Over the last 12 years, the conclusion does remain the same, not great at all. And over the last 10 years, again, pretty much the best one here was United Health, which, as we highlighted, just about sits in line with the S&P overall. Now, we are talking about a huge company in the US. It does produce a massive amount of revenue year after year. In fact, we can see it more than double from 10 years ago, 157 billion, to now sitting at 400 billion. Question we always like to consider with companies when we do an in-depth look: does the bottom line follow suit? Is there consistency? And the answer is yes for the large part. Up until 2024, it's gone from 6 billion to now sitting at 14, although a significant drop from 2023. Great to see here that on a trailing 12 month, it is expected to pick back up, and quite significantly. The other thing we like to do is a quick health check: total cash versus total debt, which has gone up from 11 billion, now sitting at 29, so pretty much a 3 times increase. Question is, how does that compare when we do a health check against total debt? Because one number here in pure isolation is not going to give anything away. Now, like we noticed with the cash, total debt also increasing. We're talking more than double from 32 billion, now sitting at 80, and actually it is superior to their cash balance, which is why the net debt to EBITDA was sitting near the 2 mark projected. Again, definitely something we would say to keep an eye on, especially given the total debt levels are increasing year after year. Now, before we jump into our valuation, just to let you know, we have released our latest free weekly article. We drop one every single Sunday morning.
Jeg har gjort mig umage med listen. Jeg tror, det kunne være sjovt. Skal vi have tilføjet snip?
Jeg er middag for 2 med snip, ikke? Altså, noget killer kebab.
Jo. Den er smagstestet. Hvor er jeres Svensex?
Jeg har ikke prøvet. Der er ikke nogen, der har prøvet Great Age Protection på den, tror jeg. Men det er ikke mange.
Jo.
Ja, der er nogen. Ja, der er nogen.
Yes,
sorry.
Jeg kan
ikke sige, der ikke er. Ej, det er min fejl.
På med min niveau her. Stack noget rage up. Cooldown statsene. We go. Sæt os om 3, 2, 1, go. Sammen. Nice.
Never even stood a chance.
Og vend om 6. Og frost ud. Og jeg har så høj grafik, altså jeg kan virkelig se de der buske klar til det.
Let's go.
Watch your feet.
Vend om 6. Ja, fedt.
check graphic settings.
Altså bare basker her.
Det er derfor, det ikke virker. Det var ikke på... God, jeg kom til at bruge alle mine... dem, jeg havde købt til Spiderwing.
Ja, dem har jeg også brugt. Jeg sad bare... Nå nej, mit fight,
fuck! Jeg ikke flere. Jeg havde sgu da 6, og så havde jeg kun sådan 4, altså.
Link to your inbox completely for free, covering severely undervalued stocks as well as what's been in the market over the last few days. So click below, you can sign up and read straight away, where you'll be able to gain access to severely undervalued stocks for the month of September. Lots of information for each one, the upside that Wall Street themselves see over the next year. And on top of that, you can grab a recently released spreadsheet of 29 stocks that Wall Street themselves believe have the most upside in the SMP right now, so click below, you can sign up and read straight away. Now our intrinsic value, as it has most recently done for UNH, consists of 2 different values. We're going to run through each 4 of these models very briefly before explaining our overall conclusions. Now the first model that we have is Graham's valuation, EPS projections for this full year, growth rate as we highlighted is 0, and the AAA corporate bond yield, giving intrinsic price of $110, our first signal which comes to overvaluation. Now we do show them separately, so if you do want to just use a few of these models yourself, that is up to you. Then we move to the multiples valuation model, companies in a similar sector and size, average PE multiplied by the EPS to give us our next intrinsic price, another overvaluation signal, before moving on to the dividend discount model. So we have the growth rate year on year, average 12%. We want to be a lot more conservative, especially given the most recent increase, 5.25, indicating another overvaluation signal, but not too dissimilar from the current market value. We then move on to the DCF model, where we have the growth rate moving forwards estimated at 5%. Now we have free cash flow year on year, and using the growth rate and discount rate, we get the present value of future free cash flow and terminal price. Add together with the cash, subtract total debt, get the equity value, divide by the shares outstanding, giving us $550. Bear in mind, for those that are interested and solely want to look at this model, on a reverse DCF, you can see right now, baked into the price is no growth at all. Some people may see that already and believe it is severely undervalued. So we have 2 values here. Firstly, the intrinsic price, which is based on all 4 models. We do believe the issues the company is facing is for the medium to longer term. If you believe that, with the current price of $353, given it is above that, there's no margin of safety. In fact, we're saying it's trading at an 18% premium. Now what we would typically do is we start off with a 10% MOS, we execute on that by, in fact, if it met our 3 golden criteria, wide moat, strong financial metrics, good forward-looking data. If you believe this model to be most appropriate, then a 10% MOS would be a buy at 269, at 20% it would be a buy at 239, which was near enough at the 52-week low, and at 25% a buy at $224. Now remember, as always, you can grab a copy of this model by clicking on the pinned comment below, run with your own numbers, whether it's UNH or any others, and Wall Street on average, whilst we see some analysts like Forbes believe this to be $600, overall the value does get to $375 into next year, indicating 6% upside. Now the other valuation, solely looking at the discounted cash flow model and the dividend discount model, gets you $444. Unlike the prior method, instead of trading at a premium, we're now seeing a 21% margin of safety. For those that are interested and want to see this at 25, then a buy at 333, at 30% around 311, and at 35 sitting around the $289 mark. So let us know overall about United Health. Where do you see this company? Do you believe the first method to be on?
Right now, these 3 stocks are down near 52-week lows. But if you assume that that means they're bad businesses, you could be missing a huge opportunity to make a load of money. You see, guys, if you focus on the numbers and the facts rather than the noise in the media, that's when you get to buy great companies at knockdown prices. So let's take a look at these 3 and see if there's a great deal or 2 to be had here. I will say till I'm blue in the face. 52-week lows are a great place to start.
Vi går sammen her. Let's go. Trinket CD her. Det er spændende. Jeg har en chill wall til execute-delen, så jeg burde ikke ret meget healing, så jeg får spam rigtig godt på vores minicam.
Jeg vil til først.
Ja, fangshot gerne. Så, se det nu. Go. Jeg skal spille.
Du skal skifte til later holdings.
Okay. Og lige et sekund til.
Hvis jeg får den sleep på tank, så skal den der spilles med det samme. Ellers kan jeg
Det er altså ikke noget, der kan det spilles.
Nej, Pau, det spil dækker over alle former for debuff, der skal fjernes. Alting på den her boss er poison, så derfor så er det poison.
Man, Steve.
Ja, det er simpelthen undtagelsen. Vend med på, Nå, lige kom med op. Jeg er 2 der bagerst.
Western ryger af nu.
Kan vi få et mark på range-gruppe?
Tak.
Ja, hvem vil være ranged indicator i dag? Det er hest. Han får en firkant. Yes, vi putter. Så Emilie op til stjernen her, cirka. Yes, Emilie omkring stjernen, og range til firkant. Så vi får det standard klap. Det bliver som vi er. God healing på Emilie, så giv den rigtig meget.
Altså, jeg tror, jeg skal komme lidt længere. Luft, kom ind. Luft, kom ind.
Okay, vend med på den.
Rul for rødt mount.
Hvad?
Yoink.
Jeg ser en 93 på en hang. Wow.
Bravo.
Og whoopsie!
Okay. Det er de vilde rolls, kører her.
Whoopsie, en 100. Hold da kæft.
Venter lige på, at de er splittet.
Han har den, okay.
Oh my god.
Så det var Apple.
What a gangster.
Og en af de skulle have pisset til territoriet.
Ruller bare. Gå i tager. Godt sådan et tor der.
Vi skal stadig de spille de der Curse of Elements og Curse of Shadow.
Det må I gerne spille. Det må I gerne. Jo, det er... Her der reflekter den tilbage på casteren selv. Det er kun med mind controls, hvor vi sætter den på. Så inden efter Twins gør på tværs der. Der er kæmper sådan her, som kommer. Så det er 4. Okay, klar den her. Stadig det hele på Plague Targets. Venter lige på de her plagues i hvert fald i dag. Så vi kører, så vi kan få dem der til meteor. Fuck idioter warriors, man. Står I bare alle sammen ud. Yes. Okay, godt bare pulle. Nej. Fjerner de op. Vent på de splitter ikke.
Double pull, let's go.
Yes, du kan godt bare pulle dem.
Sygt god til at lige poppe sådan en gang Berserker Rage.
Ind og stak. Bare kom med frem. Okay. I kan godt køre den næste her. Så Emilia på firkant, eller Emilia på stjerne, sorry, og firkant til range game lidt bagud. Vi ved stadig ikke, hvad det er for en ability. Vi er klar på den første her. Det er sjovt til den stærk. Kom.
Nej, det er den nemlig ikke. Du kan godt mærke sådan en gang.
Ja. Det er altid nice, det er godt med sådan Google Run Prep. Lige for noget mana her. Lige 10 sekunder. Yes, puller bare. Jeg kan godt nå at få en meteor derude lige til. Risky business. Max melee range, update på tank. Max melee range.
Close for reach.
Jeg fandt klap i forvejen. Og så meget range. Væk fra den her video. Så stadig lidt healing. Plague targets. tank, og vi kan godt lige få buffet shadow op på nogle af vores gutter her. Jeg vil gerne lige have dem på tanks også warriors. Nå, det synger jeg i hvert fald. De kommer til at tage på slag.
Start checking for value opportunities. Now, before you get too excited, let's clear something up. Just because a stock hits its 52-week low or is close to it doesn't make it a buy. The example I always give is I say you could, if your house is worth 500,000, you ask 10 million, and then a year from now drop to 5 million, it doesn't make it a good buy. It's still overpriced. But with stocks, in the short run, there's a voting machine. So the same thing that drove them up unrealistically will drive them down unrealistically. This is like walking into a store and thinking everything on clearance, average 50 to 60-year-old guy, value. But I like to own what? This company.
Så i nærheden af de gutter, I skal heale på.
Til Thomas.
Vi kører cooldowns i første rotation her. Så
her er Thomas' opskrift på frikadeller.
Ja.
Jeg har svære følelser for frikadeller.
Ja, det er din hjemmebane.
Ja, det synes jeg. Jeg elsker frikadeller. Og mine unger elsker frikadeller. Og frikadeller, det er sådan en... Hvis jeg er lidt uinspireret, så laver jeg frikadeller. Og i dag skal vi så teste dem. Og jeg har bedt om, at vi skal gå efter dem, der hedder middagsfrikadeller.
De er både for frost og for køl.
Blandet frost og for køl. Du købte rigtig mange.
Jeg købte rigtig mange, men jeg fandt ud af, at der var også mange af dem, som var identiske.
Og lavet samme sted. Så de får lov til at gå sammen.
Det gør de, selvom de kommer fra forskellige butikker.
Ja. Og jeg har holdning til det. Hvad jeg synes, det skal være.
Ja, så skal det godt det her. Det der. 2 stykker.
Fint frikadelle, synes jeg. Jeg kan ikke lide dem, når det bliver for mørkt, faktisk ikke.
Kan du ikke lide, at de er for mørkt?
Nej, og de skal også helst... Altså, de skal have det her bånd om, der ikke er stegt, hvis du spørger mig. Jeg synes faktisk, det smager ret meget kød. De er sådan lidt for konsensussøgende. De smager sådan lidt for meget af en kødbold, og jeg synes, de mangler lidt salt, og de mangler lidt peber. Altså, de mangler sådan lige lidt krydder. Lidt mere kraftigt. Altså, det er vigtigt, at smager peber sådan. Altså, jeg synes faktisk, at de kommer tæt på. Det er det, jeg vil lave på en dårlig dag. De er... nu ved jeg ikke, hvad fanden de er op imod. Det er den første her.
Jeg var ikke tæt på det, tror jeg altid, så du fik lige...
Kvaliteten i orden over gennemsnittet også, tror jeg. Det er ikke det værste, vi har fundet. Sjovt, det jeg sagde før. De er jo næsten mere mørke her i kanten, end de er i toppen.
Ja, det er rigtigt. De har stegskår på hele vejen.
Prøv at dufte. Dufter den ikke bare sådan lidt af grisken?
Lidt af falafel.
Ja, frityre, grillbar, sådan... Jeg bliver sådan... Ej, den er også rørt. Så er der et eller andet grønt indeni. Det skal der sgu ikke være. Hvad vi må på det her. Det smager ikke rigtig af løg. Rørt for hårdt.
Og hvad sker der, når den er rørt for hårdt? Er det så farsen, du mener?
Ja, altså hvis du rører farsen ofte, så man lige rører med salt. Så hvis du sådan får arbejdet for meget, så bliver det sådan helt stigagt. Ej, det er en træer det her. Jeg tror ikke, det skulle være noget. Det er underligt det der.
Okay.
Det smager slet ikke som det. Undskyld, men jeg ved ikke, hvad der er lavet det, men det skal de ikke gøre igen. Og de ser sgu hjemmelavet ud. Men de ser næsten for hjemmelavet ud, synes jeg. Det er også altid. Altså, det er sådan lidt magtværket det her. Det er ikke særlig pænt, synes jeg. Men altså, det skal ikke. Det vil jeg hellere have end det der, hvor de er stigt hele vejen rundt. Der er i hvert fald et ordentligt løg her. Men de smager meget ris, sådan her. Og har ikke særlig meget krydring. Altså, du ved, ingen løg. Udover løg. Ja, men smagen var der ikke. Så var den komplet. Men du kunne sagtens selv lave den som hjemmelavet. Så bare lige opjusteres i forhold til... Altså, jeg synes ikke, konsistenten er dårlig på den.
Det er i hvert fald ikke ret store...
Så får du lige 4 stykker og 4 forskellige pakker.
Den her form. Det er den mine, de vil have. Jeg synes... Altså, de er jo gennemsnitbredde, det er de alle sammen.
Nu laver vi
men kontra den første, vi havde,
så alle sammen op,
hvor der var ret perfekt stegeskår på, så den er lidt manglende her.
Finder vi dit vindue.
Et sovsebad, det havde gjort underværker på den her, så havde det været en rigtig frikadelle. Jeg foretrækker den første, klart. Forskellen er, at jeg synes, de bliver lidt for blege, og så ender det med at blive for meget, ligesom en kødbold. Så den får 5, den her. Generelt er det ikke saltmængden, og den er egentlig okay med peber, jeg synes, der mangler løg i.
Så tror jeg også, at det bliver mere varmt.
Ja, men den er anderledes.
Ja, men hvis du kigger på den, det er jo sådan lidt, altså, den virker sådan helt gummiboldsagtigt, altså, virkelig hård.
Lige med kæden.
Den vil også have godt af en turbanden, den her.
Klik på my frames bar.
Jeg synes faktisk, den her, det virker til at have bare lidt mere løgsmag. Så altså, den får en 6'er.
Bare sæt den på follow.
Det må godt være lettere, men jeg ved,
bare slip keyboardet helt nu her, så er det all fine.
Det er også for forskellige pakker. Fuldstændig ens i forhold til ingrediens og mængde.
Ja, den er bare meget mere
hvis du spørger mig, hvis du kigger på dem, så kunne de godt have kørt på samme samlebånd, men med forskellige opskrifter. Altså, at det er samme maskine, der har lavet den. Også for at lige til det hårde.
Så vi ikke bliver spredt ud. Vi venter lige et øjeblik.
God peber. Måske.
Det er fandme en flot pack, den foran os.
Den her, end der var
den
anden.
skal vi ikke
Den er sådan mere rund i smagen, synes jeg.
Nej, tak, lige.
Men meget af det de andre, altså det er jo nok en 6'er det her også. De sidste 3. Der har været lidt med smagen, om det er det ene eller det andet, eller...
Nej, det er selvfølgelig rigtigt.
Men de er tæt på hinanden. Jeg er så ret sikker på, at de har kørt på samme bånd, men er blandet af lidt forskellige fars. Altså, jeg kunne godt forestille mig, at de har lavet på samme frikadellefabrik. Eller i hvert fald ud af samme frikadellememaskine, fordi de har samme form. Det ligner sådan noget, altså du ved sådan udseendet, sådan noget, der vil ligge på et julefrokostbord. Vil du prøve at tjekke en ting på pakken på? Ja. Prøv at tjekke, om der er forår i. Det kan også være, at den er lavet med grøntsagsbouillon i forår i.
Der er ikke forår i.
Det er bare løgne, så.
Der er nogle andre grøntsager.
Er der ikke? Ja.
Skal jeg bare fortælle dig det, hvis vi lader gælder?
Nej, men du kan også sige det.
Der er blomkål i, og pastinak.
Og så er det pastinakken, man kan smage, fordi de har en lille sødt twist. Det smager lidt af pork. Men til gengæld synes jeg, det er sammen med den første også klart bedste konsistens, men også mest smag udover. Altså den får 7, men fin lille, altså den ser også hjemmelavet ud, den ligner ikke, at den kommer fra det andet samlebånd. Men den har den der søde sådan grøntsagssmag over. Altså jeg tror faktisk, det er en rigtig god børnefrikadelle, ud fra at den er lidt sød i. Altså med det der grøntsagsværk. Så ved ungerne ikke engang, at det er grøntsager.
Nej, det er smart.
Det er fandme smart.
Vi putter bagud her. Så slæger over langs venstre væg. Så tager jeg
Altså jeg synes også, det der industribånd, der kørte derovre, stegeskorpen var fraværende. Det gør også noget for helheden, vil jeg sige, fordi her der kan man virkelig smage stegeskorpen, og det gør bare, at den fremstår på en anden måde, mere hjemmelavet. Jeg synes, det smager godt, den her. Det er sådan en, du godt kunne snyde folk med. Jeg tror mange vil mene, at det er sådan en frikadellesuppe. Det smager også ret hjemmelavet, noget godt krydret også. Det er 8'eren, det her.
Det er 8'eren.
Det er 8'eren.
Sidste bunse for i dag.
Den ser også sådan lidt ujævn ud. Det lugter sådan lidt af tankstationskafeteria. Stigt i margarine. Men det er bare sådan en... Altså hvis du drejer i smør, så bliver det også bare... Sådan en karamelliseret smør. Brunet smør. Det smager lidt af nødder. Der er nok ikke så mange, der har fået lov til at opleve det her.
Det er ikke tur håb på.
Nej. Men jeg synes, den er sådan lige krydret til den kedelige side, så det... Altså den... Jeg synes også, at den mangler lidt noget løg. Altså, du kan godt snyde folk at sige, at den er hjemmelavet, men jeg synes, den mangler lidt smag. Den forrige der, den smagte godt. Og der er det kun en 6 i forhold til. Okay. Er det rigtigt?
Nej, lad være, hvor du glad. Det er rigtigt.
Ej, hvor dejligt. Skal jeg fortælle dig hvorfor?
Det er friland.
Ja, og det er derfor, jeg altså uden pis, det er derfor, jeg har købt den. Og det er jo...
Ja.
Altså helt ærligt, når du kigger på den, det er en lussing, der venter på at blive givet. Altså undskyld mig, man kan bare se det. Jeg har ingen problemer med at spise noget af det her. Men jeg vil foretrække det her. Den, der overrasker mig mest, er den her. Jeg havde ikke regnet med, jeg har aldrig set den her før.
Det er jo det der, som du sagde, der er blandet nogle grøntsager i.
Ja, men jeg var sikker på, at det var kort. De er jo slet ikke rørt lige så hårdt som de andre, og de smagte noget. Men hvis du skal have en klassisk frikadelle, skal du nok enten nogle af de andre oppe i det her. Fisirema med.
Tak for i dag.
Selv tak.
This week could decide whether we see a market crash or a monster rally, and it's not just hype. Let's just take a look at what CNB said.
All of the most important mega cap tech companies, and then Nvidia a little bit after that, but it's going to be big. For more on what to expect, let's welcome in Lo Tony. He's Plexo Capital's founding managing partner. It's good to see you. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
How do you think next week's going to unfold?
Well, I think it's going to be a bellwether for sure, because we've had so much spend. It's almost like a space race with over $300 billion in capex on mostly AI infrastructure. So I think the market's going to want to move from the promise to performance and profits.
So if this really is the turning point, then we have to know whether the biggest names are actually undervalued or in fact about to collapse. So we're going to focus on 8 major stocks that are reporting this week, running through their intrinsic value models to see which one perhaps is a screaming buy still, which one's properly priced, and which ones may tank the portfolio. And it isn't just earnings, there's also going to be perhaps a lot more volatility, as there are a few other catalysts to highlight.
There's a lot of expectations are very elevated on all 3 fronts. I think investors are anticipating bullish tech results. We're looking for not only a rate cut from the Fed, but very likely them turning off the quantitative tightening process as well. And then, Trump-Xi is a little bit more of a wild card. I think at the least investors assume status quo, where we kind of continue this detente, no fresh tariffs, they continue to talk, etc. An upside scenario would be some type of an incremental deal where you see maybe tariffs reduced, China buys soybeans and Boeing planes, etc. But that's the big wild card, I think, is the Trump-Xi summit.
Yeah, it does certainly seem like a wild card. Do you think investors are a little too optimistic that we get to some sort of, I'm not even going to call it a trade deal, I'm going to call it a truce?
Yeah, I definitely think the risk reward into that summit is not particularly positive. If it's a detente, if it's status quo, I think that's widely anticipated. I don't think that really gives you a lot of upside from here.
And on top of that, we see the market sentiment sitting in fear. It wasn't even that long we were flickering into the extreme fear zone. And remember, this is all whilst the markets are sitting at all-time highs. So will we get that Fed rate cut this week that the market is in fact expecting? That will look to be a positive overall, but you can never take anything for granted. Will the Trump-Xi meeting go positive? We just heard the risk reward isn't looking good from the analysts. Whether or not that is something you believe in, we can see just today there has been some early positive news, and maybe a deal will get done that looks to be good for both parties. And in terms of a bit of a preview before the report next week, we can see pretty much every single big tech company is estimated to show double-digit growth, although we can see both Google as well as Amazon estimating the high single digit. And investors will want to see quite a lot of things from each of these companies. Perhaps some good news for Apple, who are due to report. The iPhone 17 is estimated to be their best-selling product in quite some time, selling 14% better in both US and China than the iPhone 16. We may also want to hear a bit from Google about the potential penetration of their moat from ChatGPT OpenAI, where they recently came up with their own web browser, although it does look like even after the share price dropped from this announcement, Google is now sitting pretty much at all-time highs. We'll also want to hear from United Health, who are reporting something that Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway will be listening to very closely, as they did announce months ago they added around 5 million shares. And all of this will get us into a better place to understand if, as of today, towards the end of 2025, are we sitting in fact in an AI bubble? Because quite clearly 75% of the gains in the S&P, 80% of the profits, and 90% of the capital expenditure is all in fact coming from AI. And this has got Morgan Stanley, but as well as many analysts, very concerned. Maybe that is why we're seeing the sentiment, even at all-time highs, flickering between fear and extreme fear, because investors perhaps believe that at any point we could see quite a large correction. And as we heard earlier on, we want to understand, with all of the spending that the big tech companies are doing, are we seeing this now show up in the profits? 2.8 trillion is huge spending, and we're just talking about in the next 4 years. So as an investor, you want to know that companies can return quite a significant amount on all of this capital. And we also want to see what are the revisions potentially in this latest quarter. What is maybe the expectation for 2026? This is in fact highlighting the 2024 estimate, their January estimate, as well as July. Each company continued to revise it upwards. We can see the 2024 estimate was 235 billion. In the most recent discussions, it now sits at 363. That is a very, very significant jump. Now, as we said, we're going to run through each one very briefly, not more than a few minutes, to understand, does it look to be over or undervalued, or maybe a hold. Now, Google up 60% in the last year, up 37% year to date. Over the last 10, like many of those that we're going to cover today, has massively outperformed the S&P. It's trading pretty much at its 52-week and all-time high. Wall Street, whilst we have a buy rating, 4.49, on the cusp of a 4.5 to flip them into a strong buy. Seeking Alpha also see this as a respectable buy, 4.2 out of 5. Now their forward P does it at 26, much higher than a historical average of 21.6, well above around 15 that we were covering on this channel not long ago, looking like a screaming buy. In fact, this one hasn't been as high as 26 on a forward P, going all the way back to around the beginning of 2022. Now, yes, in isolation, this does look like it could be potentially overvalued, and when we couple it with the blue tunnel, which as always for newer viewers highlights the intrinsic or fair price, we're now seeing it like we have done over the last month, above even the upper end of the fair price, another signal of potential overvaluation. Now look, it did spend a large chunk in the last year in undervaluation, and when we zoom out to the last 10 years, this one again is in fact, at least in the last few years, a company that has traded at quite a significant discount. Very, very rare to see Google in fact ever trade at a premium. The last time was in fact around 2020, and we can see some snippets around 2018, and they do get an F on the valuation grade. You're paying an 85% premium to the sector, but bear in mind, when we compare companies against the sector, there will be a lot of poor quality companies, and the ones we typically analyze on this channel are in fact of a high quality, so maybe less information that can be taken. But as we just highlighted, it is trading at a premium to their 5-year, about 10%. Now, more importantly, for growth companies, we like to look at the PG, price to earnings growth. Below 2, as we said, gets us excited, makes us want to dive a bit deeper. 1.74, so that's looking good. 16% premium to the sector, not much to take from there. But actually, what's very interesting to note for this company is historically it's traded PG 1.35, so you are paying a 29% premium. Just something to think about. And our valuation today gets to $229 derived from the discounted cash flow. Now we have our growth rate of 12% moving forward. It is lower than the average at 20, but higher than the most recent year at 5%. And you can see we have a low, medium, and high, including an extreme one today. But as always, these numbers that you note are subjective. You can grab a copy of this model by clicking on the pinned comment below, running through your own numbers, Google, or any others. Most important out of all of this is probably what is baked in right now if you're adding at an all-time high of $260. Well, it is 13.8% growth to the future free cash flows. If you believe that is too high already, you may consider this overvalued. Vice versa, you may look at this and say, actually, I believe Google can grow at a faster rate in the long term, potential undervaluation. So we use 12% with a discount rate to give us the present value of future free cash flow and terminal price. Add together with the cash, subtract total debt, get to the equity value, divide by the shares outstanding. 229 actually indicates downside of 12%. You may sit there and say this is way too high. Well, look, more conservatively at 10%, 199, that is 23% downside. And if you're a lot more optimistic, at 14, 263, only 1%. You may believe AI is really going to help this company grow at a much faster rate. Well, look, at 16%, $302, that is 16% upside. What we typically do though on the channel is take through the middle rate, which is 12%, understand what is the margin of safety on offer today. We then use an MOS of 10% where we execute buy if it meets our 3 golden criteria: wide moat, strong financial metrics, good forward-looking data. That would be at $206, which tells us today, in fact, given the share price is much higher, no MOS, you're paying a 14% premium. If you actually believe that no and MOS is what you want, well, at 10%, a buy at 206, at 20, a buy at 183, and 25, 172. Wall Street, even with their very near strong buy rating, see 262 into next year. That is only 1% upside. And if you believe we're being too conservative, look, at 14%, you are in fact getting a 1% margin of safety. If you think that's more reasonable, well, at 10%, a buy at 237, at 20, a buy at 210, and 25, 197. One step further for Google, you believe 16% is where this company should be heading. Well, in fact, you're getting a 14% MOS. Let us know your thoughts on Google today. Is it a buy, hold, or maybe complete avoid? And don't forget to sign up to the free weekly newsletter we have just dropped 1 minute ago, as we deliver them every single Sunday morning to your inbox completely for free, covering severely undervalued stocks as well as what's gone in the market over the last few days. So click below, you can sign up and read straight away, where you'll be able to gain access to severely undervalued stocks for the month of October. November's copy will drop next week. Lots of information for each one, the upside that Wall Street themselves see over the next year. And on top of that, you can grab a recently released copy of stocks that Wall Street themselves believe have the most upside in the S&P right now. So click below, you can sign up and read straight away. The next stock we're looking at is Microsoft, up 23% in the last year, up 24% year to date, up 900% thereabouts in the last 10, trading not too far off their 52-week and all-time high. A strong buy rating from Wall Street, a buy but on the weaker side from Seeking Alpha, where their forward P of 34 is above, although fairly slightly, their average at 32, so another, similar to Google, potential overvaluation signal. But actually on the blue tunnel, we still see it within the upper and lower boundaries, although towards the upper end. This one not once has traded at a clear premium, but it has in fact traded at a discount during Liberation Day, although not for that long, where in fact when we zoom out to the last 10 years, Microsoft, maybe to no surprise, rarely ever trades at a discount, around 2023 in one instance and Liberation Day. Otherwise, more often than not, it does trade at a premium overall, so maybe one to consider if it does in fact come under a discount. And that is why we always say, make sure you subscribe, notification bell is on. High quality companies like Microsoft, when they are severely undervalued, we will let you know. And then on the grading, they do get an F, 31% premium to the sector, 6% you do 10 and bucket a bit of inflation into next year, 19% upside. Let's use the mid-rate and Berkshire Hathaway. So let us know your views on Meta Platforms. We then move on to the one that Berkshire Hathaway will be closely looking at, United Health Group, down 35% in the last year, down 28% year to date. Over the last 10, still, even with the drop, it has outperformed the S&P, trading more towards the 52-week lows than 52-week highs. Huge pullback from $631, where we get a double buy from Seeking Alpha and Wall Street, both of them sitting in fact above 4 out of 5. Although we do notice the forward P, like the previous companies, continuing the trend, 23 above the average at 20, and we can also see slight overvaluation. It does sit above the upper end, something we didn't note with the previous companies. The intrinsic blue tunnel has been decreasing, not something you really want to see. But when we do zoom out over the last 10 years, we can see it all in fact came in 2025. Otherwise, historically, the upward trajectory does look to continue. We've noted year to date, this one has in fact started to come down. And the valuation at a B-, 19% premium to the sector, 9% premium though to their 5-year average. And our intrinsic value, a little bit more complicated for the company. But the first thing we will say is, if you solely want to look at a DCF like the other companies, $550, where baked in today is negative 0.2%. So let's just say no growth to their future free cash flow. However, we have used 5% moving forward, meaning that is quite some upside if you solely want to look at this model today. Now we have two here in fact in terms of intrinsic values, one using all four for those that believe this company is in fact facing issues over the longer term. That in turn means you are paying a 20% premium today, no margin of safety. For those that do want to just look at the DCF and the DDM, well, $444 and 18% margin of safety. If you wanted 25%, then a buy at $333. Wall Street themselves pretty much sit around fair value today at $360, where upside is noted as -1. But let us know your views. Is United Health one to buy, one to hold, or maybe one to completely sell? We then move on to Apple, up 14% in the last year, 5% year to date. Over the last 10, up 800, trading like quite a few today at its all-time highs around $265. Only one buy rating from Wall Street, fairly weak. The other two giving this one a hold, where we notice forward P34 well above the 5-year average of 28, quite a clear indication of potentially severe overvaluation.
Hvis nogen mangler summons, så kan vi lige fikse det op ved gruppen. Jeg kan lige... Altså, det, jeg ved ikke hvorfor, jeg aldrig selv ser det, men det der med demote warlocks, de er stuck i mine frames også, selvom I er blevet demoted for længe siden, så har I stedet sådan en tankikon.
Hvem var det, der lavede det asshole move der? Hvad var det for et dæk? Hvem var det, der lige bunkede slagtefar, mand? What the fuck, bro? Jesus Christ.
Nå, var det en snibbold?
Der er en, der snibbold ham med det hoppet. Total asshole. Må jeg paper? Men det er fucking shit, altså. Ja.
I knew it! Er den præst derinde?
Ja.
Jeg skal bare lige have en warlock eller noget ud.
And when we do look at the blue tunnel, this one is sitting above the upper end, something it has done for quite some time in the last 12 months. And also over the last 10 years, Apple does typically tend to trade at a premium, but once or twice, like...
Ja, vi kommer ind. Jeg kommer ind fra Ubers.
Hvorfor er du saved? Hvad er det for noget?
Members of Congress have been loading up on UNH over the past few weeks. This includes Marjorie Greene, who's known for timing market bottoms. She's made 2x gains year to date in both AMD as well as Palantir. But the big question we...
Bare Dijon fastholde mig, jeg skulle ligegyldig. Det vigtigt, han får.
På mit map står der som om, at Dijon, Holy og MK, de står oppe i Altric Mountains og bagved. Er det der Ubers ligger?
Åbenbart.
Jamen altså, Lyshas Layer ligger jo nede over i Stone Talon Mountains for eksempel. Altså sådan selve instansen på en eller anden mærkelig måde.
Du sagde MK også, ikke? Du ved godt, han er lootmaster. Han ved ikke, hvordan man løber til en dungeon.
Hvorfor er jeg på en master loot?
MK har da aldrig været lootmaster. Han
er med i Loot Council for pokker.
Nå, jo. Loot er ingen skid.
United Health Group stock ticker UNH is now up over 40% in the last month. And if we look at how it's trading today, before market close, it's currently up about 8.3%. So the stock has seen a huge surge in the last month. And in fact, if we actually look at the top performing S&P 500 stocks in the month of August, UNH came in at number 2. It was up about 24%. Now, with all that being said, if we zoom out a little bit further, it paints a different story. Year to date, this company is still down 31.4% in the last year, down 41.63%. Now, in the last few days, last couple of weeks, we actually have quite a bit of news surrounding UNH stock. A couple of them are bad and a few of them are good. So we have some new information that we need to assess to see if it changes the outlook for this stock, and really to see if there's still opportunity despite the stock being up about 40% in the last month. So let's go ahead and dig in. Now, before we even look at the recent news, in case you don't know what's been going on with UNH stock, why are they down so much in the last year?
Well, again, this is something I was covering over on dividendology.com. Every single month, I put out a list of undervalued dividend stocks. You can check it out at the link in the description. But one of those companies that I covered in that newsletter was United Health Group. And if you've been keeping up with the company, you already know about the bad news. Now, to start off, February of 2024, this is when the snowball unfortunately started. They suffered a massive cyber attack, and it caused up to $2 billion in direct costs. So, in fact, if we just go ahead and jump over to the stock screener and look at UNH, you can see all this data will load in. And like always, if you'd like to download any of these spreadsheets and also get access to the ticker data add-on in Google Sheets that allows you to automatically import stock financials directly into your spreadsheet, then you can head over to tickerdata.com at the link in the description. But here's what we want to pay attention to. Look at the earnings per share for UNH. Now, the first thing you'll notice from 2014 to 2023, it's pretty much the most beautiful EPS chart you can look at. It's growing at a high rate. There's not a lot of fluctuation or variability in the EPS. It's simply growing consistently at a very healthy rate. Then we had the 2024 drop-off. Earnings went from $24.12 all the way down to $15.64. And this was a direct result of that cybersecurity attack. Now, the good news at the time was the company stated this would be a one-time cost. They expected earnings to recover until the rest of the bad news started rolling in. We had the CEO unalived. We have the DOJ antitrust probe. And then we have the disastrous Q1 earnings where they also lowered their guidance, and right around that same time, they had the DOJ criminal fraud investigation. That's a lot of bad news all at once, and it's really what led to the huge sell-off starting in mid-April. At the time, the stock was about $583 per share. So again, this was a significant sell-off for a stock that already had a massive market cap. It's pretty rare we typically see that. Now, on top of this, we have to understand that historically speaking, this has been a phenomenal dividend growth stock. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about share price appreciation. I mean, free cash flow has been growing, and as a result, the dividends have been growing at a high rate as well. We can see right now the starting dividend yield is about 2.44%, which for reference is significantly higher than the historical starting yield for the company. You can see over the past 5 years that yield was typically around 1 to 1.5%, but the sell-off caused it to surge well above 3%. But after the bump up in the last month, the starting yield is around 2.44%. But look at how good the dividend growth has been over the past decade, 16.3% in the last 5 years, around 12%, and this has been backed by growing free cash flow at a high rate. Again, dividend growth is not sustainable without growing free cash flow. So look at that, 2014, the dividend was $1.41. Now it's about $8.51, just a little bit over a decade later. I mean, that is phenomenal dividend growth. So there's the background for the company, but what about the recent news? What's been going on? What's the good news? What's the bad news? Well, let's go ahead and start with the bad. We had an article come out late August, essentially stating that the Department of Justice probe into United Health is going to be a little bit wider than previously reported. Now, this has been an ongoing investigation for a while now, and so far the news about the investigation has actually been good for UNH. They've had to move from one department of the business to another because essentially they didn't find anything. But what this report told us is the DOJ investigation was thought to be isolated to its Medicare business practices, but is now understood to also involve how the health insurer reimburses doctors as well as pharmacy benefit manager Optum. Now again, so far they haven't accused anyone, they haven't found anything, but this is something we need to be aware of. On top of this, we had another report in late August that UNH was under pressure for the loans it made to healthcare providers after the cyber attack. Now, for reference, the cyber attack impacted UNH's Change Healthcare unit, leading to a backlog in claims being paid to providers. The insurer then made loans to providers in response. Again, I don't think this is a huge news story, but it's certainly something where if you're interested in UNH, you want to be aware. Now, let's talk about the good news, and clearly there is good news because the stock is up over 40% in the last month. To start, UNH has recently reaffirmed their annual earnings outlook. Now, this is big news for a few different reasons. Obviously, like we pointed out earlier, UNH saw a huge sell-off, it looks like around mid-April, and that's when they lowered their EPS guidance for the year. And if there's anything investors hate, it's uncertainty. And the UNH management team was essentially telling us they were uncertain what the future looks like. But now what they're telling us is they're giving us a little more guidance. The company projected adjusted earnings of at least $16 per share on $445 to $448 billion in revenue. Analysts currently expect the firm to earn about $6.24 in earnings and on revenue of $448.2 billion. This is vitally important information because it really helps with at least the valuation outlook for UNH stock and also providing some certainty for investors. So this number is important. We'll come back and talk about it in regards to valuation in just a minute, but what we can see at $16.24, they're already going to recover above where they were in 2024, which is obviously a great sign. But then on top of this, we have United Health rises after Medicare Star ratings upgrade. Essentially, what this means is in the pre-market today, after the managed care giant said that based on initial data,
Hvordan har jeg den? Okay, chok. Det er Kulberg eller Dugi, eller Vita. Who knows? Eller Dijon. Kulberg, Kulberg.
Der var lidt pøs, var der ikke?
Ja, du kunne godt tage et skjold på der, Kulberg. Det er en rigtig god idé.
Ej, jeg havde fuld tillid til de 4 lægerfans, vi havde op.
No balls.
Vi går sammen her. Bare gå.
Hvis du er vant til med at gå ind og drikke lige døråbningen. Gør noget.
What? Man kan både nå at charge og intercept på samme target.
Ja, det kan godt.
Hold da op.
Det er sådan noget, hvis man...
pænt, du dør jo.
Det er sådan noget, hvis man stadigvæk er lidt ung, så kan man stadig nå det.
Jeg starter noget RP.
Jeg synes ikke, du behøver sige det der med lidt unge.
Ja. Yes. For dem, der bor with us, så kan vi unboon her.
Skulle vi boone dem?
Det er altså... You choose.
Jeg tror, vi har spillet det her i hvad? Et år nu? Snart.
Joker jo.
Okay. Det kunne jo godt være, det ved jeg da ikke.
Lige, når vi kører ud her, regner med lige at stille mig i Stormwind, når vi kører ud, så kunne der være mulighed for at få en Onibok, man lige kunne boom.
Det er en plan.
I stedet for, at jeg misser de der 3 stykker, der kommer der.
Leo kunne også unbruge sin nu, bare lige for at flex med.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Det blev væk for mig, det her. Jeg har den, det er godt. Ud til siden.
Og var ikke unboonet. Det er simpelthen som om hun vidste det.
Hav plejer aldrig unboonet.
Yes, vi går på.
Wait, what?
Prøvede du at DI den, og så redde den, og så lykkedes det ikke? Ja, okay, så det er et respekt på mig også.
No, tak.
Du skal bare fra. Yes, okay, vi har en plan. Er der en hånd, der er klar til at pulle det op? Er der om 2 sekunder også? Og så Nazgul, du kommer til at skulle slibe en. Så vi tager kun munden her. Puller bare. Nej, vi tager dem begge to. Og vi husker at loot bootsene. Du skal nok også lige give den et distracting shot, eller noget mere end bare der kan. Det kommer ikke til at holde. Så tænk sammen, jeg starter op. Der er Captain går igennem, der stjernen går igennem. Og det spil på Sardina med debuff.
Roughly 78% of its membership could be enrolled in its Medicare Advantage plan rated 4 stars and above for the 2027 payment year. Essentially what this means is they're going to be eligible for annual bonus payments, and plans with higher ratings are entitled to higher bonuses. Now, this news isn't final, but again, it's really good news, especially into regards to them being able to reaffirm their earnings outlook. So let's talk about that valuation for a moment, because obviously it's changed a lot in the last month with the stock being up over 40%. So let's go ahead and jump over to our sensitivity analysis and look at UNH. Now, there's a couple of things we need to make note of. We've already pointed out how historically earnings have grown at a very healthy rate. And what's interesting is one of the cool features of ticker data, as you might already know, is you can automatically import the average analyst EPS estimate for future years with ticker data. So that's what I've done. And we can see from 2025 to 2029, the projected EPS CAGR for UNH is almost 16.5%. So they're still projected to grow earnings at a very healthy rate moving forward. So let's just run a scenario where they achieve that average earnings growth rate, 16.5%. Let's just bump it down to the actual number, 16.49. Now we need to project our future PE ratio for this stock. This is where it gets interesting because the average over the last decade is around 23 for UNH stock, which honestly is a very reasonable PE ratio for a stock growing earnings at a very high rate. But the trailing 12 months PE ratio is now just 14.84. Now, trailing 12 months isn't a perfect way to look at this because obviously earnings are going to be quite a bit lower than they have been historically speaking. But with that being said, assuming they revert back to a PE ratio that's still significantly lower than the 10-year average, maybe something like 18, you can still see this looks like attractive returns. By the year 2030, the total return, actually not including dividends, would be about 80.5% or a compounded annual return of 10.34%. Obviously, that's well above market averages. If they reverted almost all the way back to their average PE ratio, you're looking at well over a double, a 120% return, and a compounded return of 14.1%. So from a valuation perspective, there's certainly no doubt. The stock is undervalued. If you have any experience with financial modeling, that's really not too hard to find. So what's the concern? Well, really, it still boils down to the DOJ probe. But there's something we have to take into consideration. Number one, Warren Buffett just bought this stock. Now, the reason I personally think this is interesting is because his entire life, he's stated the importance of investing in companies where you can trust management. He seems to believe what management is stating, that the DOJ won't find anything. What we're also seeing is UNH is seeing significantly more congressional buys than they have historically speaking. And on top of this, I'm always tracking what super investors are buying, what dividend stocks are they buying. UNH was the #1 most frequently bought stock by super investors in the most recent quarter. And to add fuel to the fire, insiders have bought more shares in 2025 than they bought from 2007 to 2024 combined. Look at all the insider buying in 2025 for UNH stock compared to the previous years. It's significantly more. So yes, I can't predict what the DOJ investigation is going to find. There's probably not many people who can, but what we do know is the big money is certainly flowing into this stock right now. And what I do also know is there's no doubt if they achieve the average EPS growth rate projection from analysts and just trade at a reasonable PE ratio, the stock looks clearly undervalued. So even after the share price jump of about 40% in the last month, the valuation is still more than reasonable. But with that being said, you have to be aware of the risks, because the risks are still there for this stock. So go ahead and let me know what you think of UNH stock in the comments down below if you plan on buying or selling. And like always, if you'd like to download any of these spreadsheets and get access to the Ticker Data add-on in Google Sheets that allows you to automatically import stock financials directly into your spreadsheet, then you can head over to tickerdata.com at the link in the description.
So we set up these next up.
Hey guys, so we have some bad news for United Health Group today. The stock, as you can see, plummeted in late market hours from 306 all the way down to 297. Now it's slightly rebounding back to $302 per share, and this is because of news regarding the Department of Justice, DOJ, and their ongoing investigation into United Health Group. There were some more details released on the investigation today, which we are going to be covering and then going over the fundamentals. And we're also going to be going over, again, obviously, the historical multiples and looking at a sensitivity analysis once again. With these factors in mind, we'll probably go with some more conservative assumptions to see the potential returns you could get from today's levels. But first, we're going to cover that article. But before we cover that article and the bad news with United Health Group that came out today, let's roll the intro.
I've been a rich man, and I have been a poor man, and I choose rich every time.
I make investing content, and my channel is Dividend Dude. You should leave a like and subscribe if you're going to enjoy the video. A disclaimer, this is not financial advice. I am just a dividend. And it says that the 2 bullet points are that the DOJ probe is now also scrutinizing Optum RX and doctor payments, and United Health has already responded saying it has full confidence in their practices. So before, the DOJ probe was just on the Medicare Advantage segment of the business. Now the DOJ probe is on the Medicare Advantage segment of the business, the Optum RX segment of the business, and doctor payments segment of the business. That is the bad news. There's just a broader DOJ investigation than what was known before. What was known before is that it was just on Medicare Advantage, and now that has changed via this article from Bloomberg. So let's get into the fundamentals of United Health. So I've covered the fundamentals of this business many times, but we'll quickly gloss over the fundamentals for you guys that have not watched one of my previous United Health videos. Obviously, consistent earnings growth. The earnings per share did decline in the most recent quarter. The reason for the earnings per share is not the DOJ. The reason is the higher morbidity rate and increased utilization rates and costs.
Tager lige det første hit for dig, maybe. Lige pas på bomber, det bliver lidt shaky nu.
Costs temporarily, which management has said.
Så tjekker de, hvor boss er, og så hvis der er nogen, der skulle have hovedet der, så de ruller med. Lige nu er det MK på en 97'er. Okay. Du kan bare pulle den her pack, jeg Rita. Bare pulle den.
Men der er en endervægt til trup, hvis der.
Ja.
Godt. Vi lader Skold gå igennem. Så løb den hele vejen igennem lokalet, Rita. Lad være med at slå på Skold overhovedet, bare lad den gå igennem. Så samler de andre target op, og så kører med dem.
Jeg trækker magic på dem.
Ja, det er nature på Skold i hvert fald. Lige firkant løs. Super.
Hvilken præst er det, vi mangler i dag?
Masper.
Det er Masper, der altid renewer hele rated.
Det er Howie.
Og det er Howie.
Howie, Shadow. Det var også min tanke. Ej, det er perfekt timing.
Shadow? Er det noget? Kan vi lige nå boss her? Kan vi lige nakke den?
Skal jeg komme en nade?
Jeg tager en karpe på her. Vi puller her. Kom, på med noget fire resist. Nade. Ja. Okay, vi kører. Lige nogle healers indenfor. Den der plejer at gøre det, gør det bare igen. Probably. We go.
Vi kan putte en boss med 20% mana. Det bliver dejligt.
Ja, det er godt. Lige reposition en lille smule minus.
Okay, jeres mana ved du godt.
Lige præcis. Altså, jeg har lært det. Nogle ting så foran og klar her om 3 sekunder.
Der er en, der høfter sin raid leader.
Bare tårnt nu. Det bliver det chunk, der har den. Lækkert.
Shit.
Wing buffet her. Kommer tilbage på snip. Og vi gør. Check jeres stacks. Ikke dræb jer selv.
Jeg hører Paper Tank. Og går op på 11.
Yes. Tanks klar igen op foran her. Tårn der er bare af nu. Chong har den. Venter på wing buffet. Og på snip resten. Lige vest på paper. Yes, vi skipper ind på linje. Op på Skold her. Fra Skold og lige linje frem. Skippenings.
Så Pop. Prøv at se her, Petsnikker også, ikke? Du skal stå faktisk her, hvor jeg står lige nu. Fordi så løber Pet ikke over den der linje der.
Altså, jeg skal være ærlig at sige, jeg håbede så meget, at dit pet pullede.
Jeg troede, jeg var den eneste, der var et dårligt menneske.
Fuck yeah. Det vil det gøre. Hunters, lynhurtigt her.
Jeg har Skold og kryds.
Super, Skold kryds. Yes, jeg går ned og firkanter der. Ikke helt på ham. Lad ham bubble. Aim shot som 3, 2, 1, nu. Venter med granate. Venter, og vi gør. Go. Og trop ind. Lige på firkant ud til væggen. Jeg ved ikke om... Ja, okay, jeg står med firkant. Det skal også. Hvor var du henne der, Sardina? Du var... Hvad laver du derinde?
Du var meget tæt på.
Jeg er på vej til Skold.
Nej, okay. Yes. Ja, det er true.
Sgu ikke slemt. Det er faktisk...
Yes. Næste paller, der er klar. Godt. Du kører hele. Vi andre bliver tilbage. Ned til væggen. Rita kommer ned os. Ikke være for tæt på. Aim shot som 3, 2, 1, nu. Hvis der er nogen, der har nades, så kører I nu. Og vi går ind. I fat i targets. Ikke gå ind og prøv at tænke jeres stuff her. Super. Du tror, der bare mig igen. Jeg var lige med på firkant til at starte med. Lige noget rain of fire på midicampen. Pas på midis. Der er både cleave og alt muligt andet. Vi vil gerne tage firkant ud væk fra gruppen. Det kommer til at skade rigtig meget ellers. bare stille den for sig selv, eller så tager vi endnu mere random damage, end vi plejer. Og så dem, der har en god resistance til den, kan bare pumpe igennem. Vi bliver nede ved væggen igen.
Jeg kom til at give dig salgtur.
Yes. Leo kører, vi andre går væk. Ikke mere buff, ikke mere buff. Paper, kom ned. MK, værsgo, lige kom væk. Tror du også for tæt på. Hunters klar, vender et på krydslok op. Aim shots om 3, 2, 1, nu. Og vi kører, granater.
Det er hvis du aim-shotter på skold, og så multi-shotter på munden.
Hvad siger du?
Ja, jeg skal nok gå ind og få munden. Det er fint. Det passede super fint i den her pack.
Du kan også bruge dit multi-shot på det target, du ikke kaster aim-shot på.
Okay.
Jeg mistede mit kostume der, dude.
Boomen kører, vi andre bliver væk. Ikke nogen, der buffer. Vi drikker lidt mana, mens vi venter på pullet. Hunters klar. Venter. Bubble, Boomen. Pet, okay. Vi aim shots på 3, 2, 1, nu. Aim shots. Og granater, vi kører. Nu er det ikke engang vores mobs længere, fordi han har tagget på dem alle sammen. Foregår der.
Mega troll.
Og nu bliver månen lidt mærkelig her.
Nogen, der har skold?
Det spil? Nej, det er noget, du tænker. Jeg har månen.
Det er bare i orden, jeg tænker den.
Blev det? Ja. Ja, den tænker du fint.
Hvor er det et kæmpe chat move.
Mili, gå væk.
Skal vi lige invite Boomen igen, inden han bliver portet ud til gengæld?
Inden altså, han kan nå at loot hans mobs, eller hvad?
Altså, hvis der dropper et eller andet raid item, så kan vi ikke engang loot det. Okay. Tænk så foran er klar. Kører vi en fab her. Og vi puller. Lige lidt for tæt på... jeg kom til at bruge en armor på det sted for. Arm retarded. Gå på kryds i stedet for. Så skal du godt løs her. Hvis du kan komme ud til den Dugi eller anden, gå tilbage på snip her nu. Du har den. Dugi har den. Ja, det er super. Vi kan begge to gøre det. Så bare læg med på skold her. Du kommer til at slibe mig igen. Så Dugi tænker den her. Så bare gå til trekant som den næste.
Bare trade boom. Eller
smart. Slå på whatever.
Nej. Jeg nåede også lige herover.
Og det var mere det hensyn, jeg stod på circle stance med 20% liv på stand. Jeg råbte bare af.
De her sleeps, de er for forfærdelige. Okay. Mana, så boss. Jeg går bare putte et eller andet til os.
Last night, the crying of the children kept me awake, and I had a terrible vision. I saw the fall of our city, bleached bones under a harsh sun. Carthage, gone. Why would Baal send such a vision? He's not cruel. He has watched over us. We have had victories aplenty in war. Our merchants sail to all corners of the world. And yet now, I fear I cannot help it. We are the envy of lesser people. They tell terrible lies about us. They do not understand, so they lie. But the Romans, they are the masters of falsehood. War will come, I'm sure of it. So I will have no more false visions. And I think the children will be quiet tonight.
For 7 centuries, Carthage had forged an empire which came to dominate much of the Mediterranean. Yet from such heights would come a fall of unprecedented scale. Just a generation after the nightmare of Hannibal had terrorized Italy, now it was the legions whose boots were touching down upon Africa to return the favor. Yet they came not with orders to merely subjugate. No, the army which bore down on Carthage had but one objective: the complete and total annihilation of its foe. There would be no quarter. What followed would be one of the most brutal sieges of antiquity. This is the history of the third and final Punic War.
So I'm super excited to kickstart this project with you. The sessions falls
Clashes of epic proportions, whose waves of violence were driven by both the macro trends of nations and the deeply personal motives of individuals. In the case of the Third Punic War, it will be worth reviewing both of these threads which lay the stage for our story. Rome's victory in the Second Punic War had firmly shifted the power balance between the two Mediterranean rivals. Where once there had been geopolitical parity, now Carthage was clearly subordinate on the world stage, reduced in its status to that of a mere friend and ally of Rome. This new paradigm was laid out legally with the terms of a peace treaty that had been signed in 201 BC. It stipulated the following: all plunder, all prisoners, and all war elephants were to be handed over. All but 10 triremes of the Punic fleet were to be demobilized. All mercenary recruitment of Celts and Ligurians was forever banned. All overseas possessions were made forfeit. All of Numidia's territory was to be restored. All future wars must be approved by Rome. All campaigns must be contained to Africa. And finally, for the next 50 years, 10,000 silver talents must be paid annually.
2, 1.
But while such terms are easy to list off, it's difficult to imagine what this drastic empire-level disarmament and deconstruction looked like from the ground level. Unfortunately, no Punic sources remain to tell their side of the story. We are therefore left with but a few clues left by later Roman authors. Appian, for instance, reports that the harsh terms of the deal caused a period of political turmoil among the Carthaginians. Many in the public feared that for the next 50 years they would now be burdened with double taxation, and that in the event of famine or disaster, aid relief for the common folk would come second to the obligations to Rome. Punic citizens now threatened to burn down the homes of their leaders, forcing many to flee, while some of those who remained attempted to seize on the populist sentiment by whipping up the crowds from the speaker's platform. Ultimately, the uprising was put to rest by the looming threat of further Roman violence and the influence of respected leaders who still held sway with the people. The great General Hannibal, for instance, knew well the cost of renewed war, and is said to have literally dragged down one of the Punic leaders who had been attempting to resist the signing of the peace treaty. Carthage now seemingly resigned itself to its humiliating fate. Thus it was that of the three major factions which were said to rule the city in the interbellum years, one favouring Rome, one favouring Numidia, and one favouring the common people, none made any moves to break the terms of the treaty. As proof of this one point of agreement, we can imagine that they all participated in the strict compliance measures, which included hosting Roman inspectors and sending embassies to Italy. But perhaps the most painful obligation for the leaders of a once great maritime empire was to give the final blessings to its condemned fleet, which had gathered in the harbours of the city. Appian claims that on the appointed day, 500 ships were rowed into open water and set ablaze. In this conflagration burned the hopes and dreams of Carthage's rulers. Yet to the common citizen, this was perhaps seen as a cleansing purge of their leaders' folly. What had they gained from these years of endless war? Perhaps now, finally, attention would be paid to their needs at home. Such popular disaffection with the ruling oligarchy was seized upon by Hannibal, who rode the wave to become elected Suffete in 196 BC. From here, he worked to strengthen the popular assembly, to overhaul the city's finances, and to go after the elite for their corruption. While Hannibal would eventually be chased into exile by Rome and his rivals, the reforms seem to have helped Carthage regain its footing. As its industrious people focused on what they did best, lucrative trade routes were revived and agriculture boomed. Prosperity soon returned. In this period, archaeology reveals a fresh wave of new construction across the city, from homes and temples to the grand Kothon harbour. So quickly did Carthage rebound that within just a decade, it was already prepared to pay off the remaining 40 years of its war debt. Unfortunately, this renewal would draw the wary attention of its friend and ally across the seas. Let us now briefly turn our attention to the affairs of Rome. Victory in the Second Punic War had left Rome with a massive haul of wealth, slaves, and territory. Most importantly, though, it had left Rome with one of the most battle-hardened generations ever in the Republic's history. Now addicted to the spoils of victory, this war machine would be unleashed across the Mediterranean. What followed would be a dizzying number of campaigns over the next 50 years. To briefly enumerate them, this would include the First Macedonian War, the Second Macedonian War, the Spartan War, the Boeotian War, the Seleucid War, the Aetolian War, the Galatian War, the Celtiberian War, the Third Macedonian War, the Illyrian War, the Lusitanian War, the Numantine War, and the Fourth Macedonian War. Yet, as the years dragged on, the veterans of the Second Punic War would gradually be attritioned or aged out of the military. Such a loss was not easily replaced at a time when armies were still being levied and disbanded on an annual basis without the continuity of professionalized institutions which might otherwise maintain the skills of its armed forces. Such a degradation of Rome's military is noted by our ancient sources, who bemoan the difficulty of raising men and waging efficient campaigns. Yet, as this old guard dwindled, a few remained to carry on the torch. Most notable among them would be Cato. Born in 234 BC, he had been in his 20s during Hannibal's invasion of Italy and had seen his fair share of battles against the African menace. By 151 BC, Cato was now an 83-year-old senator. He stood as a reminder of the old, austere ways of the past, in an era when the descendants of Rome's conquering generation were seen as increasingly soft and decadent. Thus it was that the elder statesman clung to his hatred of Carthage, chastising those who ignored the resurgent threat in favor of their inherited luxuries. Such was Cato's persistence that he famously ended his speeches, no matter the occasion, with the cry, "Carthago delenda est." Carthage must be destroyed. For years, these calls fell on deaf ears. Until one day, an opportunity arose to see the deed done.
Kan man ikke trykke soundboard?
Across the seas, another vestige of the Second Punic War would be the one to light the spark of war. Massinissa, the king of Numidia, was approaching his 90s. In his younger days, he had switched sides to support the Roman invasion of Africa, helping them to break the back of Carthage at the Battle of Zama. In doing so, Massinissa had reaped the benefits of his neighbour's downfall, and for years had done everything in his power to further chip away at his kneecapped rival. In 150 BC, tensions reached new heights as the Numidians launched bold raids into Punic territory, ravaging the lands and laying siege to the city of Oroscopa. Carthage had had enough. They now raised an army to finally punch back. This was done without first seeking Roman approval or arbitration, a mandate of the terms of their treaty. Such behaviour was a reflection of the growing frustration of the Carthaginians. The Romans had shown a bias towards the Numidians in prior arbitrations, and had no incentive to greenlight the raising of an army to defend themselves. Thus it was that the populist faction of Carthage kicked out those among them who pleaded to keep the shackles on and now made ready for war. They did so by raising a force of 25,000 foot and 400 horse, many of whom were said to have been raised from the citizenry itself. Appian reports that this force was further swelled by allies to a total strength of 58,000 men. These successfully pushed back the Numidian raiders, defeating them in a series of skirmishes. However, the Punic army was soon lured into a pursuit of the main enemy body, which had retreated into rugged terrain. It was here that Massinissa offered battle. What followed was a day-long clash. Yet, as the sun set, neither side could claim victory. In the aftermath, Punic and Numidian negotiations took place with the Roman nobleman Scipio Aemilianus acting as an intermediary. Ultimately, no progress was made. What followed was an uneasy stalemate as the Numidians encircled the Carthaginian camp. It seems that neither talk nor action could break the impasse. Both sides were determined to simply starve the other off the field. The Punic commander reportedly believed he had the advantage of supplies.
Så når I vundet noget, så er det hen ved ham.
Men derefter så skal dem, der unboonede hurtigt til Ratchet. Der var en announced rent klokken, hvad var det, 22.05?
Det er 23.05 nu, så der er lige tid til at få en CT på.
Mere eller mindre langsomt til Ratchet.
G-sæt rost.
Scratch. Nå, jeg er lige ved at bede 5 minutter også, og så skal vi jo huske også, at vi har Officer Meet, os der er med det. Det går alt der bagefter.
Ja.
Hvad? Skulle du ikke ned og lave vasketøj?
Jo, det er det der.
Så officeren skal ikke være med til tegn og gæt?
Det kan vi ikke, nej, ikke i dag.
Jeg tror ikke, der kommer nogen overhovedet på.
Ej, hvorfor?
Vi har ikke signet op til noget.
Jeg laver et tegn op til næste gang.
Vi har arbejde i morgen.
Ja, vi har en teams
raid-tid.
raid-tid.
Du er inde på raid-tid, mand.
Nå, jeg er lige ved at bede. Tak for gutter. Det er
jeg
nice.
glemte at sætte uret tilbage, det er derfor.
Ja.
Jamen, så går jeg da bare i seng.
Nej, vi er stadig raid-tid nu.
Nu går i seng.
Jamen, så skal vi sætte game.
Go with us.
Too much power.
Okay.
Vi gider ikke.
Kan I seng? Det kan godt være en raid-gruppe, men...
Jeg må ikke gå i seng. Jeg må ikke gå i sæt game.
Du må ikke gå i seng, hvem fanden siger det?
Det var væk-tid.
Nå.
Så kan du hjælpe med vasktøjet.
Ja, det kan du faktisk gøre nu.
Jeg har gjort det. Han skal
Du
bare
har
hente
gjort det.
Det er bare tumpet og tørt, han skal bare hente det.
Nå, nej, så skal han jo hente det, så skal han få det samme, og...
Folder du underbukser?
Ja.
Hvad?
Jeg folder dem da på halv. Jeg folder dem på halv. Hvorfor fanden skulle jeg bare lægge ned? Altså, jeg har jo ikke så meget plads i mit skab, eller mere, jeg vil sige, mit tøjskab. Så det er sådan pænt for det sådan i halvt, og så strømperne sådan ved siden af.
Jeg har ikke engang peget mine sokker op.
What?
De ligger bare i sådan et stort råd, og så finder jeg 2, der passer sammen.
What?
What?
Det gør jeg også. Det gør jeg også.
Nej,
Pau. Jeg er blevet for doven til det der.
I det mindste, så finder du nogen, der passer sammen.
Ja, det gør jeg ikke.
Det kommer an på, Lucia, om man er klog kun at købe én slags sokker. Så er det jo aldrig et problem.
Der er rigtig mange af dem, der er de samme, så det plejer jo også at stå på.
Hvad 10 packs?
Bare hvor tit tager du så Kaspers?
Strømper?
Ja.
Når de er krympet?
Og du har kogevasket dem, eller hvad?
Nej, jeg tager ikke hans. Men han gør det samme.
Livet er sgu for kort til at stå sammen sokker, mand.
Ja.
Alt sammen bare op i en kurv. Tager den der.
And the strength to punch out of the encirclement when necessary. However, in this he had underestimated the enemy and soon found himself truly trapped. Appian paints the unfolding scene. Quote, hunger wasted Hasdrubal and the Carthaginians, and being much debilitated, they were no longer able to assault the enemy. First, they ate their pack animals, and after them their horses, and they boiled their leather straps for food. They also fell sick of various diseases due to lack of food, want of exercise, and the season. For they were enclosed in one place and in a contracted camp, a great multitude of men exposed to the heat of an African summer. When the supply of wood for cooking failed, they burned their shields. They could not carry out the bodies of their dead because Massinissa kept strict guard, nor could they burn them for want of fuel. So there was a terrible pestilence among them, as a consequence of living in the stench of putrefying corpses. Thus did Carthage plead for terms. They would be allowed to return home with the relinquishing of their arms, the exchange of prisoners, and a promise of a 50-year war indemnity to Massinissa. However, as the defeated army now marched solemnly home, their helpless column was set upon by one of the Numidian cavalry commanders. From the slaughter that ensued, few made it out alive. The oath-breaking enemy now had free reign over Punic lands, and the Romans showed no signs of reining them in. Given all this, it should be no surprise that Carthage was in a state of deep frustration. Yet still, they feared the ire of Rome. A delegation was sent to Italy, pleading for them to do something about Massinissa's invasion. But the senators merely flipped the table on them. How dare Carthage raise its arms without Roman approval? To this, the envoys offered a defense. When this was rejected, they then asked how they might atone for their sins. Rome merely answered, "You must make it right with the Roman people." A second embassy was sent to clarify this chilling remark. Apparently, they came with offers to pay a large fine, to give up territory, and to do anything that might ensure peace between Rome and Carthage. But again, they were met with the cold response, "You know what you must do. One can only imagine the fear this must have struck in the hearts of the Carthaginians. The implied threat was further magnified by reports that armies were being raised across Italy. The reason given was equally ominously, in case of an emergency. Such matters justifiably spread panic across the shores of Africa. Many in Carthage fell into deep debate about what to do next. Meanwhile, others had already sensed the way the winds were blowing and took action. Most decisive among them was Utica, the second largest city in the region, which now preemptively declared itself for Rome. Thus were the powers of Italy gifted with a fortified beachhead into the enemy's land. For even the most hesitant senators, such an opportunity was impossible to resist. Carthage was seemingly being offered up to them on a silver platter. And so, without a moment's delay, they voted to declare war. Appian recounts the ensuing rush of activity, quote, "They immediately dispatched the consuls in command of the forces, Manius Manlius having charge of the foot soldiers, and Lucius Marcius Censorinus of the fleet, and they gave them secret orders not to desist from the war until Carthage was razed to the ground. After offering sacrifice, they sailed for Sicily, intending to cross over thence to Utica. There they were conveyed in 50 quinquiremes and 100 hemiololi, besides many open boats and transports. The army consisted of 80,000 infantry and about 4,000 cavalry, all the very best. There was a general rush of citizens and allies to join this splendid expedition, and absolute confidence in the result, and many were eager to have their names on the enrollment. Such was the speed of this advance that the declaration of war and the war itself reached Carthage at the same time. The timing was devastating. The Punic power had just lost an army to Massinissa. They had no fleet, they had no mercenaries, they had no allies, and they had no supplies. They were in no state to remotely challenge Rome, as had once occurred in the First and Second Punic Wars of their forefathers. Once more, Carthage pled for peace by any means. The Senate responded that this might be considered if they first sent 300 children from the noble families to be kept as hostages. Despite any suspicions they might harbor of betrayal, the Carthaginians nonetheless submitted. Appian paints a heart-wrenching scene. Quote, "They sent their children into Sicily, amid the tears of the parents, the kindred, and especially the mothers, who clung to their little ones with frantic cries and seized hold of the ships and of the officers who were taking them away, even holding the anchors and tearing the ropes and throwing their arms around the sailors in order to prevent the ships from moving. Some of them even swam out far into the sea beside the ships, shedding tears and gazing at their children. Some of them tore out their hair on the shore and smote their breasts in the extremity of their grief. It seemed to them that they were giving hostages only nominally, but were really giving up the city when they surrendered their children without any fixed conditions. Many of them predicted, with lamentations, that it would profit the city nothing to have delivered up their children. Such were the scenes that took place in Carthage when the hostages were sent away. Upon receiving this group, the consuls gave word that further instructions would soon come. Meanwhile, however, they sent secret messages to their troops to press the assault. And so, for the first time in over 50 years, a Roman army landed in Africa. Its purpose was clear. Carthage must be destroyed. The arrival of Roman troops sent shockwaves across the city of Carthage. The people began to panic. Soon, delegations were sent to plead with the invaders for mercy. Appian brings to life the chilling reception they received. Quote, When the ambassadors came, the consuls placed themselves on a high seat, with the chief officers and military tribunes standing near, and the whole army drawn up on either side, with arms glistening and standards erect. When the consuls had proclaimed silence by the trumpet, a herald told the Carthaginian envoys to come forward, and they advanced through the long camp. But they did not draw near to the place where the consuls sat, because they were fenced off by a rope. We are told how the ambassadors begged the Romans for peace, stating that they had no allies, no mercenaries, no armies, and no elephants. But the cold reply came, quote, "If you are sincerely desirous of peace, why do you need any arms? Bring all your weapons and engines of war, both public and private, and deliver them to us." The Carthaginians complied. As commanded, they immediately loaded a vast wagon convoy of materials. It included 2,000 catapults, 200,000 armor sets, innumerable javelins, and countless arrows. Such was the remarkable nature of this spectacle that even the Romans were impressed. And yet they were not moved.
Jeg faldt lidt, men så tidligt af, da jeg lige var inde og tjekke, så koster de 800. Så okay.
Er det i Silithus, man skal aflevere den der quest egentlig med DI?
Du skal ind i raidet igen. Bare tage en af os, der har været derinde, og så skal du ind og snakke.
Er det ikke en af dem, der er til allersidst i raid?
Til bagkant.
Helt op til hvad?
Altså, snak med en af dem, så skal de teleportere dig op til Satun, men jeg kan ikke lige huske, om det er i det første rum, du ved, lige efter Scarum.
Nå ja, det er lige efter den første boss.
Ja, så er det der. Og så skal du bare derind. Du skal bare have en, der har været raided, og lige, eller tage din egen alt.
Nej, men jeg har været raided på den her.
Ja, men du skal lige have en og...
Om jeg er stadigvæk i raided.
Okay.
Det er næsten fuld raid group endnu.
Så, bare derind.
Du sagde med den der underbuff, at du var allerede i Westfall og alle mulige ting.
Ja. Jeg står på øen.
Tak da.
Godnat, Pau.
Der var ikke nogen, der skulle have den der pizzaspædel.
Pizzaspædel.
Det ligner den. Jeg tror, den ville være rigtig fint til sådan noget.
Det er bare begrænset, hvor meget man kan lave i det her spil.
Ja, men det
Jeg
er
ved ikke, om det kommer senere hen, men...
Ja, det gør det nok. Jeg ved ikke, om...
Jeg har altid
det
stoppet i kassa, så jeg har aldrig der. Det vil sige, så har jeg været sådan ganske kort inde og spille Pandarian. Men nej. Der sker bare noget med spillet i kassa, der ikke tiltaler mig.
Ja.
Det er bare dumt.
Ja, det er det. Det er ikke noget
Spillet
med
er,
spil at gøre.
nej, spillet er bare dumt. Det er noget fucked up noget.
Men det er nok fordi, man når til kassa i første omgang. De fleste af dem, der spillede World of Warcraft, de spiller ikke mere på det tidspunkt.
Nej, det gør de nemlig ikke. Ja, jeg tager smut. Tak for i aften.
Ja, lige meget.
Lige meget.
Okay.
Nu vil jeg ned og se, om jeg kan finde Setun så. Eller hvad han hedder.
Healy, har du... Er der også Stone Scarab og Bronze Scarabs 5 stykker hver? Har du dem? Ja. Jeg dem også. Stone, ikke bone. Måske de så forkert. Canvas. Jo, Stone og Bronze. Let's go. Many thanks.
Of course.
Så løber jeg sgu ned for bukser med det samme.
Til de tekster på ZG, please.
Ja, jeg sidder klar.
Fucker mit Leatrix Maps helt.
Hvor hurtigt tror jeg, vores AQ ville være, hvis vi kørte fuld buffs nu?
Hvor kan du spørge, hvor mange der ikke har unboonet? Jeg synes, der var mange, der unboonet.
Ja, men der var også en del, der ikke gjorde. Jeg vil lige tjekke. AQ, Scarum, vi havde 1, 2, 3, 4...
Jeg var bundet først efter ham, tror jeg.
Scarum havde vi 17 uden world buffs, altså hvor de var bundet, og så havde vi en 2-3 stykker, der bare havde hentet lidt små ting, sådan en unik shell og en ZG. Så cirka halvdelen af rated er bundet, og halvdelen er ikke. Du var bundet på den første LT.
Ja, det er okay. Jeg kunne bare huske, at jeg lige blev lidt forsinket med at unbone.
Ja.
Det tager heldigvis ikke så lang tid igen at samle dem til onsdag.
Ja, der skete noget mærkeligt ved vel. Jeg tror måske, der var et jeg tror, jeg kom i combat med nogen, måske fordi jeg blev healet eller andet, så min unboon lykkedes ikke på Vale. Men,
de der, hvad hedder de, engineers op på hjørnet, de stod og smed bomber ned. Så hvis du ikke har været i combat med dem, så kan det være det derfor.
Ja, måske. Jeg synes bare, der var rimelig god tid efter. Jeg fik ikke lige gennemskud, hvad det var, der linkede mig sammen med combat, der gjorde, jeg ikke kom ud, men der var det, da jeg først opdagede det, var det for sent, og så måtte det bare køre.
Jeg er ked af at sige det, men den der wisp, det var altså fordi Mitsa sagde, at jeg ikke havde MD.
Man må godt lave det et år, ikke?
ZG.
Ej, nu dropper den. Jeg er lige sejlet. Sådan noget. Tis.
Hvor hopper af?
Kommer 50 sekunder. God tid. 40 sekunder.
Jamen, jeg røg en på den anden side.
Det var sgu
Jeg har heller ikke buen til den, så det er nok fint nok, at jeg lige venter med den. Jeg skal ned og have den. Det er stort.
Men det er ret nok at have fundet ud af, at det er bare mig, der skal være ude af combat, for at det kostume, der virker.
Det er også vildt, de der mages, de er begyndt at droppe. Det er også lidt stort for hele ugen.
Ja, det er lækkert.
Det er to i træk nu. Jeg fik den sidste gang, jeg nåede rosen.
Det er dejligt.
Det er det.
Snip, ved du om de der NPC'ers inde i byen, man kan få, altså aflevere de der necrotic runes, forsvinder de også her den 30. Eller vil de stadig stå der?
De burde forsvinde med Invasion Event.
Jeg tror, de er der en uge mere, er det ikke?
Ja, det
så
kan
man
godt
stadig kan hente den lidt længere, men...
Leftover.
Okay.
Jeg har hørt nogen snakke om, at de der ting, I samler, de der flasker, det der, at det også skulle være dis på nogle bosser i
Det er det også.
Mount Hyjal. Kan det passe?
Både i Warzone og der er vist kun det er trash i Mount Hyjal, hvor det er undead fra første boss.
Jeg hopper i officerstak.
Ja.
Tak for det.
For raid for i aften. Ses
Så
onsdag.
jeg kom herned for at hente jer, Lasse.
Ja. Up we go.
Jeg er på vej ind af hængstur. To sek. Jeg logger lige ind her. Har du en banehængs, jeg kan join? Fint, mand. Så kan jeg sgu bare lige sådan her, mand. Hvad fanden? Jeg kan ikke se dig. Alle fucker lidt op. Nå, jeg kan ikke se dig lige nu, Hanks. Okay, jeg laver lige. Send am. Finde en. Der har dem.
I am listening. Feel free to browse.
No problem, man. Hvad så? Hvad nu? For helvede. Okay. Har du noget andet? Går det til Infini, eller hvad? Ja. Ej, du kan ikke lukke hurtigere end mig, mand. God damn. Jamen, jeg er bedst til at leve om hjørner med folk. Du lukker sådan her. Okay, fair nok. God damn. Nå, også må lige sige, hvad den ruller. Om det bare er lækkers. Fuck.
Once more.
Altså lige.
Jeg hopper af disk, men vi snakkes ved.
Tak for det.
Hej.
Hej. Hank, skal du huske, hvor mange af de der Bijous hand-ins for shoulder enchant? 15. Skide godt. Skal jeg sgu mere dum. Tandelapper. Og hvor meget damage har du op på, Hanks? På din Asa. Har du fået boostet noget mere, eller? Er der ikke rigtigt? Nå, okay. Trigger tree, man. Hvad får jeg? Fik jeg noget?